Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're so pleased to have Delegate Sam Rasoul with us this morning. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. Good to be with you, Woody.
Very frenetic, short session so far. How are things going from your perspective?
Yeah, keeping us very busy. Not only, of course, do we have somewhat of a split assembly, but with a short session, there's certainly a lot of moving parts, but it's keeping us busy.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the 11th District, City of Roanoke.
Yeah, we're very excited about a lot of the changes that are happening in Roanoke, specifically the larger investments around the Carilion Medical School and the Research Institute, the Fralin Biomedical Research Center. We're doubling the size of that research institute, which will hopefully change the face of Roanoke. Virginia Tech bringing in some large investments. We are excited about it, wanting to see the development in all corners of the city, and we'll keep pushing for that. But things are looking pretty good.
I guess the Amazon announcement is also very exciting, at least in terms of Virginia Tech's involvement.
Yeah, it's a pretty big announcement for sure. Happy for Virginia Tech building this billion-dollar campus in Crystal City. Certainly all the technological jobs that are coming. And we'll be debating that in the coming weeks to figure out exactly what that whole package looks like to ensure we've got a balance for let's try to bring in industry, bring in these workers, and at the same time be good stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Of course, transportation is a big issue, especially in terms of rail in the city of Roanoke.
We brought in Amtrak a few years ago. That's been doing very well. But the bigger issue this year is around I-81. What will we be doing with I-81? We know that it is not a reliable interstate. Almost on a daily basis, there are big issues. And so trying to figure out what are some key modifications we can make, and those have been identified. Now the question is, how are we going to pay for those? So as we move forward, I'm ready to work together with anyone on a bipartisan basis to make sure we get I-81 fixed.
Number of funding proposals, including tolling on I-81.
Yeah, there are a number of things on the table. I think one of the worst ones is potentially like raising the sales tax. I think the sales tax is the most regressive tax that we have. So I would not be in favor of touching the sales tax. Now, I'm not a big fan of tolls either. The proposal that has been out there, though, is talking about potentially having an annual pass that's pretty inexpensive, and that way you're not feeling it on a daily basis. So it seems if we're going to go that route, that has been a pretty reasonable proposal.
Let's talk a little bit about education. I know you have a number of initiatives this year, but today is a very special day. Apparently, there are a lot of teachers who are going to be marching and demonstrating here in the streets of Richmond.
Yeah, red for ed. We've got a red tie on today. We've got teachers from all over the Commonwealth coming down and having their voice heard. Look, I just think we talk about education a lot, and everyone's a big education fan, but it's really a critical piece of what we do. The Secretary of Education has asked us legislators to go into the schools more and learn a little bit more. So this year I took him up on his offer. Now I actually signed up to be a substitute teacher in Roanoke City Schools. I'm trying to get to every school over the next year. And boy, schools I've been to have shown me a lot. That teachers are not just trying to keep up with SOLs, but there are all kinds of behavioral issues. It's a lot of growth and development. Our teachers are really helping to raise our children. So I think society just needs to value that and do a much better job.
Of course, one of those ways to value those teachers is to raise their salaries, and that's part of the governor's proposal in his budget amendments this year.
Yeah, and that we are the 8th wealthiest state, but depending on which statistics you look at, we're probably between 30th and 40th as far as teacher pay and how we value our teachers. So we just need to make sure that we're valuing our education system, appreciating our teachers, and in the richest country in the world, our teachers definitely deserve more.
And of course, we expect more from our schools, but teachers are inundated with not only dealing with discipline problems, but also children who bring problems to school as a result of the environments they live in. There are fewer nurses, fewer counselors, fewer mental health personnel in the schools.
Yeah, I wrote about a piece a couple months ago saying talking about the violence of poverty. We don't really think about, when we think about the poor, there's more of a pity and we feel sorry, and instead of understanding that poverty actually is a persistent state of trauma, and any type of violence produces trauma. I think that we need to look at the poverty and the struggles of working class America and think of that as a profound form of violence that we're inflicting on people. And again, in the richest country in the world, we're going to look back and say, man, how did we not take care of our own, take care of our education system, ensure that people begin in an equitable position? And there's so many issues pervade our society as a result of this cycle of violence. And one of them is, of course, the lack of investments in our education system.
And of course, we've gotten accustomed, unfortunately, to school resource officers being in our schools, and they're really law enforcement, and their tendency is to deal with kids acting out in terms of a criminal offense as opposed to something that should be handled internally.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm a big fan of, when we say early childhood development, very specifically something called socio-emotional development. So I'm not interested in the 3-year-old learning to read fast. What I'm interested in is the 3- and 4-year-old learning to understand their emotions, how to deal with them, how to work together in teams, how to be able to communicate. And what we see is actually people graduate from high school, go into the workforce, and the number one problem that employers have with workers once they're employed is, oh, this person doesn't have the soft skills, can't work on a team, is not motivated, doesn't have good self-control. And in a place like Finland, where they spend the first 7 years of a child's life only worried about their socio-emotional development, they don't really care so much about ABCs and colors and all that good stuff. They have a much stronger emotional base. And it's much harder to fix an 18-year-old than it is to invest in a 3 or 4-year-old.
So what kind of initiatives in terms of education are you pursuing this year?
So this year we're requesting that the Department of Education come up with new guidance on socio-emotional learning, and that should be promulgated throughout our education system. I think as much as we can get rid of our SOLs, the way that they're structured now.
Standards of learning.
Yeah, our standards of learning, without threatening the federal funding that comes down. But anything that we can do as a state to get rid of the non-essential pieces and replace that with socio-emotional growth and development, we should aggressively be doing that as we move forward. And that's what my piece of legislation does.
Turning to the issues around energy, I know you've been active in that as well. The last few sessions here have been devoted to dealing with some of the electric utilities, and I think you have a bill dealing with refunds.
Yeah, I just think that it's the way our structure works is we have these energy monopolies. Your electric company is a monopoly, and we allow for that because we have an entity called the State Corporation Commission that oversees them to say, don't take advantage of people on their electric bills. The problem is that the General Assembly controls that entity, and then the electric company gives people like me money. So if the electric company is giving me money for my campaign, and I'm making the rules to oversee the electric company, what we've been doing, and now it's been proven that your electric bills are too high, and we're allowing them to overcharge almost all ratepayers in Virginia. And to me, that's straight stealing from people. We need to make sure that we're protecting the ratepayers, and so this piece of legislation is called the Refund Act, or the repeal of the Dominion tax, to ensure that we fix a lot of the parts of the code that are taking advantage of folks. I just think that if you're going to allow monopoly, we have to keep them in check.
Now, how has that legislation been received by your colleagues?
Well, it's gotten more traction than ever before, I think, for sure. You might have heard Attorney General Mark Herring will no longer be taking regulated monopoly like Appalachian Power and Dominion donations. So the Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, over the past couple of years, it's almost standard part of campaigns, especially on the Democratic side, to say no longer be taking these kinds of donations. And so the narrative has completely shifted over the past few years. While this piece of legislation won't pass this session, it's clear that we're gaining a lot of traction. And I'm happy we're able to work on a bipartisan basis to make sure that we are protecting ratepayers.
Now, what about campaign finance reform in general? The members of the General Assembly can take unlimited dollars outside of the session from corporate entities as well as individuals.
Yeah, a couple of years ago when I announced that I wasn't taking any special interest PAC donations, people thought that was crazy, and now we've elected more members of the General Assembly who have taken similar pledges and are limiting the influence of dollars in their campaigns. The reality is we're one of the worst in the country as far as our campaign finance is concerned. And so that clearly needs to be something that is to be addressed in the near future.
And of course, the U.S. Supreme Court a number of years ago equated corporate personhood with the use of campaign finance, meaning corporations are persons under the eyes of the law, and they should be allowed to contribute to campaigns.
In a narrow 5-4 decision, Citizens United, the infamous Citizens United case, came down and said exactly that. So what I have said, I'm joining people all around this country, on the right and left, who are calling, and that's a piece of my legislation this year, calling for, because the states can petition to change the United States Constitution. And we are petitioning to change the United States Constitution because the Supreme Court said it's constitutional for them to do it, but if we change the Constitution, we can get rid of that. And so my legislation is asking Virginia to join other states who are saying no longer should this be allowed.
There's another constitutional initiative in a few different forms going around that has to do with the creation of a nonpartisan commission to draw legislative and congressional lines every 10 years. There's real concern that both Democrats and Republicans have engaged in gerrymandering over the last, centuries, if you will. Where do you think that's going to pan out?
Well, it's clear that Democrats and Republicans have abused it, and the party and people on the losing side at that moment in history are the ones that are essentially whining about it, right? And so we have Democrats pushing back in some states and Republicans pushing back in other states, and clearly it's just unfair. I'm a big fan of an independent redistricting commission. I think it's just almost unethical for somebody like me to draw my own district lines. We need to make it as clear and objective as possible. So I would clearly and have been a big supporter of that in the past.
I guess some would say that's all well and good. The devil's in the details, however, for example, who gets appointed to those commissions, by whom, what's the criteria as you have indicated, and to what extent is the General Assembly bound by a recommendation?
Yeah, I think making it as binding as possible is important, and just as important as who's on that commission are the rules that they have, the criteria we call it. I've found out that, in my opinion, the criteria is even more important than who draws the lines. So we want to make sure we have some strict rules there.
Now, you serve on the Privileges and Elections Committee, I believe. where is that legislation? I assume that's where it landed.
Yeah, that's where it landed. In the House, it's still out for debate in the Senate as well. So I think that'll be something that won't be decided until very late in the session as far as are we going to make any progress, but I sure hope we do.
And of course, it has to happen this year for it to become effective as a constitutional amendment by the time lines need to be drawn once more.
That's right. So we have to have it pass the General Assembly. There needs to be an election, which there is in November for the General Assembly, and then it has to pass again next year, and then it goes to the ballot for the voters to vote on in November of 2020.
You also have some legislation dealing with the Green New Deal. What is that all about?
A lot of people are hearing about this movement at the national level about a Green New Deal, and what it's saying is that we can elevate working and middle class America by investing in a new clean energy economy. The reality is that the Trump administration has issued a dire warning and said that by 2030 we are going to have some severe impacts to our economy, to human services, to the environment, if we don't take action. And some people believe part of it might be even too late, that it's inevitable that some of it's going to happen. And so, folks, if the Trump administration is even telling us we've got to take action, then I think it's important for us to own this and be bold and be direct about it, and lead this in a way that has a just transition that puts workers and working families first, creating tens of thousands of new jobs here in Virginia, and at the same time helping our environment.
So in other words, no longer relying on fossil fuels, for example, and looking for other alternatives like renewables.
Yeah, I mean, clearly technology has advanced a good bit. We see that on a very regular basis, the new advancements in technology, and per kilowatt hour, renewables are right there with everything else. So why not go to the cleaner source? I know people are anxious to make a lot of money off of natural gas and other fossil fuels that are in the ground, but we need to make good decisions for our country moving forward.
Now we have an interim funding now out of Washington, D.C. as a result of the partial government shutdown. To what extent, if any, has that affected your district? I don't know if you have any federal employees or contractors who live in your district.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to be several hours away from Northern Virginia. We do have some in Roanoke, but Virginia is the second most reliant state on the federal government as far as contracts, et cetera, just because of our proximity to D.C. and a lot of the companies that help the federal government, in addition to what's happening in Hampton Roads and our military bases in Hampton Roads. So, it's having and had a profound impact on our economy here in Virginia. We're hoping that politics can be pushed aside and we can come up with a solution to keep this thing going beyond the February, 15th deadline that has been placed.
Healthcare has been a big issue. We're implementing Medicaid expansion now, but there are a lot of issues around healthcare, and I know you've been involved as a healthcare consultant in your career. Mm-hmm. How is the implementation of Medicaid expansion going, or is it too early to tell? I know a lot of people have signed up, but what's happening there?
Yeah, it is a little bit early, but when you have, now we have well over 200,000 people who have signed up, more than half of the people that we think are eligible, so which I think is fantastic. And they started January 1. Here we are in the third week into the fourth week of January. So we're excited, and a lot of people are excited about having this opportunity. So we've heard of no major kinks thus far, which is great, and we'll continue to be encouraging people to sign up. Almost everyone in Virginia has an opportunity, hopefully, to be able to access affordable health insurance.
The crisis of poverty you mentioned earlier also deals with other things that come out of that. I know we're still dealing with the opioid crisis. How's that going in your district and statewide?
Yeah, I mean, it's been devastating in the Roanoke Valley, but clearly, as you go deeper into Southwest Virginia, it's even worse. And I don't know if we've come up with a silver bullet. But again, you kind of come back, and it's a variety of things. It's you have doctors who have been overprescribing opioids, which is finally now getting into coming into check. You have this cycle of poverty, which, if folks are out there, they clearly don't have some other choices. It makes things difficult. It's the socio-emotional piece. What we see is this: if you want 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds to be more resilient and to be able to push back against peer pressure, you've got to prepare them at 3 and 4. And then that way they're not making those first gateway decisions that lead them into a bad direction.
And the state has also put in place, I believe, a database to prevent doctor shopping, so to speak, for those who are adept enough to know when they go to Dr. X and he or she finally says no, they can go to Dr. Y and get another prescription.
Yeah, I mean, improvements to the PMP, the prescription monitoring program. So there have been lots of different pieces here. I think what we haven't addressed are some of the core societal problems around poverty and education that kind of lead to some of those bad decisions. And not all of them, but some of those bad decisions. And so I think it's important for us to have a well-rounded conversation. Usually what we'll hear about is doctors overprescribing, and then some of the drug trade that's going on. But why did people make that decision to begin with? It's a complex question.
What about the rising cost of health care? I believe now there's a federal initiative that requires hospitals to lease sort of the fundamental procedures they provide patients and what they list the prices on their website. Do you think that's helpful?
Well, my wife had emergency gallbladder surgery last month, and we got the bill 2 days ago. And the top line of the bill was $54,000 for her gallbladder surgery. And the insurance write-off portion, the insurance adjustment, was half of that, leaving the insurance to pay another half. So I won't say that it's a completely minor surgery, because no surgery is very minor, but it was a pretty minor surgery. But if we had to pay privately and didn't have insurance, we'd have a $54,000 bill. I mean, that's just crazy. We have good insurance. I'm lucky as a state legislator. I get some of the best insurance in Virginia, but most of Virginia doesn't have that luxury. And so out of that $54,000, I'm paying $300, right? Think of how many bankruptcies are occurring with people who have this skimpy insurance that has high deductibles and high copays. And look, 10 years ago I ran on single-payer health care. I don't really see why we continue to have these different pockets. We need to have a way more aggressive approach to our healthcare evolution here. And we're trying to make sure that we're protecting the profit of a few, and to me it's just not right.
Talk to us a little bit more about that single-payer healthcare. Would be like, I'm on Medicare, for example, so it would be Medicare for all in essence?
Exactly, Medicare for all. Why are we spending 20 to 25% of our budget on overhead and profit? Medicare has a 3 to 4% overhead. And Medicare is pretty efficient. So imagine if everyone was on Medicare and just had this single payer, this single health payer. It would be more efficient. We could streamline some things. We could be ensuring costs. There are a lot more downward pressure on costs in lots of different ways, not just access, but pushing down on costs. Because right now, suppliers can supply the hospitals and come up with equipment and charge the hospitals whatever they need to charge, because then the hospitals can send me a $54,000 bill. And I'm not saying it's their fault, but they send me a $54,000 bill, they send it to the insurance pays half of it. As their costs increase, they just pass it on to me for my insurance premium. So it's a terrible cycle. It's a terrible system that sees no end in sight. And I think the whole thing probably needs to be flipped on its head.
And of course, excuse me, the rising cost of of prescription drugs is a big issue as well. It's always been a puzzle to me that, for example, the Veterans Administration, as I understand it, can negotiate with drug companies on behalf of veterans, but CMS that handles Medicare is not allowed to do that.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? Medicare, what we call Part D, through CMS, can't negotiate. That's very intentional. I mean, the pharmaceuticals put a lot of money into the pockets, campaign contributions into the pockets of legislators at the federal level and otherwise, to ensure that their little fiefdom is protected. So we need to be smart about what's the best thing for people moving forward.
Of course, the fundamental issue facing you and your colleagues over the next few weeks is the budget. This is the second year of the budget. As a result of tax cuts at the federal level, there's going to be a windfall to the state of Virginia, and unless some changes are made, state taxpayers may be hurt.
Well, it certainly will make things way more complicated if we don't conform. So I'm a big fan of conformity. That'll create a windfall. Taxpayers here in Virginia are going to see a several $billion benefit on their federal taxes, and they'll have a slight hit on their state taxes, which is a fraction of the federal. What we're saying is that hit, that windfall that the state would have, what the governor has talked about, which I'm a big fan of, is the earned income tax credit. You've got working families who get more of a benefit in the form of this EITC. I think it's a great way to be able to boost the economy and help people who need it the most.
So at what level or what level does the earned income tax credit kick in, for example? What income level?
Well, a part of that depends on the number of dependents, et cetera. But the narrative that we've been talking about largely is how can we come up with something that benefits individuals and families that are making less than $50,000 a year. The ITC doesn't go all the way up to that, but in many cases. But the reality is what can we be doing to help those families that need it the most? And I think it's a great tool to use.
And of course, what we're talking about is making that earned income tax credit fully refundable. Virginia is a state that does not refund anything.
Yeah, fully or partially refundable. There are different ways of playing with it, increasing the income threshold in different ways, and so it gathers more people. So I think that we need to focus on and figure out how we can build on that EITC.
So last 30 seconds, how will you define success in this session?
Look, we don't know what's going to happen in the upcoming elections, and if Democrats are interested in taking control and moving forward, which could happen in November, working with my colleagues to figure out how can we come up with systems and ways to be able to best serve Virginia moving forward, and I look forward to being able to do that.
Great. Thank you for being here, Delegate Sam Rasoul. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.